Chapter 129. The chatter in the MPE building's laundry room was energetic when Alden walked in with his gym suit over his arm. "After we eat, we could all go to something at the mall together. It'll be late. We won't even make it to the restaurant until after 8. It's Friday. Who cares if it's late? Marsha's team is still in the gym. What do you think the faculty are doing with them? They weren't cohesive before, but that last run was too far, don't you think? They completely broke down. We could go to the cinema. I'd rather shop. We have stipends now. I already spent mine buying things for the dorm." Alden headed for a cleaning cabinet that Rebecca had just taken her own suit from. While he put the garment on the mannequin and hung the cuffs on the pegs, he listened to his classmates' chatter. Even Fabry and Shrike's team, who'd suffered 2 losses today, didn't seem too upset about it. Olive was on the other side of the room grilling Hoyu about how he'd been able to tell her apart from her illusions, and Fabry was trying to explain to Constantine that the team had had a plan to make a statement about solidarity that had been ruined because of their defeat. "We were going to almost win," he explained, "and then we were going to have the last person refuse to cross the finish line. Because Soren isn't here. It was going to be a gesture. A gesture like that." Khan rocked back and forth. "I see what you were going for, but that might make Soren feel uncomfortable." "Sounds patronizing to me, too," thought Alden. "But I guess Soren might appreciate the effort even if it's misguided." He shut the cabinet and leaned against it. It made a faint humming noise as the cycle started. Instructor Klein had asked Team Vandy Marsha to stay behind after class instead of heading to the locker rooms with everyone else. He hadn't said they were in trouble, but it didn't seem likely that they were being held back for praise. Upon hearing that her group was being singled out, Vandy had looked so appalled that if Alden hadn't known what was going on he'd have assumed something earth-shattering had just happened. He felt a little sorry for them, and he was glad he was here instead of in their shoes. Officially the end of another week. Nothing to do tonight but take a bus ride down to F, eat dinner, and hang out. His team had won. His skill had gotten a workout. And he'd just had a hot shower that he hadn't needed to rush through. Some of the guys had decided the swimming tank was enough of a bath. It would be almost perfect if Maricel hadn't had to go. He hoped whatever news she'd gotten wasn't terrible. When the team had finished running the course, Fragment and the principal were both gone. It made him worry more, but they might have left for some other reason. Maybe they had last-minute arrangements for the dinner or, Maricel. "Mari. Are you all right? Where'd you go?" Some of the girls sitting on the benches by the door had spotted her first. Maricel had already changed out of her gym suit into a denim skirt and pink shirt. "I'm good. I'm so sorry. A friend called, and they were in trouble so I had to, a friend from home." "Are they okay? Do you get to go back home to see them?" "It's all fine. I told Instructor Fragment. It's taken care of." She headed toward the nearest available cabinet while Everly and Tayet told her all about what she'd just missed. "Maricel," Jeffy shouted. "We fed them to victory." "Why do people on your team keep saying that?" Finley asked Alden from the next cabinet over. "I think it's our motto now." Maricel looked over Everly's shoulder toward him suddenly, and her dark brown eyes met his. Her smile was more strained than happy. "Everything okay?" He texted her. He expected her to say yes whether it was or not. She hadn't been one to confide everything. Not since that first day they'd met, when she felt she had said too much. Sure enough, she nodded. "We really missed you on the course." People were still calling out fight highlights to her. Alden's name came up more than once. "Alden killed Winston," Hoyu said. "He went for the throat." And Jerry sounded approving. "Finley, would that have killed you, too?" Jupiter asked. "Can't we kill you that way?" A lot of heads turned toward the speed brute. "What are you all planning to kill me for?" Finley said. "And how should I know? Nobody's ever tried to take my head off with a fishing line. We didn't do that kind of thing at my old school." "They don't train you for lethality during PE in Scotland?" Alden asked. "Imagine that." Finley laughed. "It would kill him if he hit it like Winston did. Greater than Ignacio said. But he might not hit it like Winston did. Greater than. That's true, Finley agreed with a shrug. My visual processing and reaction time are better than his. I also try not to go at top speed when I'm about to engage with someone. Liu Ariel says in battles she goes faster than a villain can understand, not faster than she can understand. Pushing it all the way is for getting to the fight in the first place, isn't it? Or when you're outmatched. Do you like Ariel? Hoyu asked. She's friends with my parents. She's my favorite, said Finley. Was she your favorite before or after she got her last few upgrades? Fabry asked. Because she became a lot of people's favorite once she started getting the special stuff. Some brutes think speedsters taking short-range teleportation is unbrutely, said Rebecca. That's because those brutes are jealous they haven't reached the point where the system gives you the option. Finley was gesturing animatedly. They all slack off on their training when they get old if you ask me. Liu Ariel's kept up her leveling all this time. She's going hyperbolic sooner or later. I believe in her. I believe in me. I'm going to get that same skill one day. Khan was walking around the room, touching random stuff lightly with his fingers and closing his eyes. His object reading skill outlasted the spell impression that went with it by a significant amount. He was supposed to be burning both talents out every day, just like the rest of them, but since he never had opportunity in class, he spent a lot of time poking things throughout the day and psychically analyzing their recent history. He pulled his hand away from the unused washing machine at the back of the room and looked around at Finley. I'm surprised you didn't go to Lee Jean. She teaches there every now and then, and I'm sure you could have gotten in. I did get in. But they invited me to watch some classes, and I decided it would be hard to follow along with the system translations and do my best in their gym. Felt like I'd be stopping to read every other second. While the conversation continued around him, Alden composed a message to Jeremy, describing his gym victory. Jeremy had hinted a couple of times that Alden wasn't going into enough detail about the superpowers when they talked, so he wrote more than he normally would have. By the time he was done and his suit was clean, Team Vandy Marcia had been freed from whatever lecture they'd gotten. None of them were speaking to each other, so if the subject of the talking to had been the importance of team unity, it had failed. Mehdi looked like he was ready to hit someone. Max's expression was completely unbothered and pleasant because he was a scary bastard, but somehow tension was still emanating from him like a poisonous gas. And as for Vandy, a couple of the girls said she was hiding in an empty classroom while she called her family and confessed to all her personal failings. Winston was nowhere to be found. Everyone with a sense of self-preservation left them to lick their wounds and get dressed by themselves. Alden vacated the building with most of the class, walking between Lexi and Hoyu as they headed toward the nearby street. The wind that had been blowing right around the track earlier hadn't let up any, and there was a distant grumble of thunder. One of the Chilena North buses was waiting for them. Alden sat by Jeffy, with Lexi and Hoyu across the aisle and Everly and Khan in front of him. As the bus filled up, Khan suddenly leaned out of his seat to look up and down the aisle. Everyone's in pairs. Are we going to make Vandy's team all sit together in the back? Ha! Said Reinhard. That's hilarious. It is a little, said Khan. But they're going to ruin our class dinner if they get any more. How they are. I saved a seat for Mehdi. Heloisa called from near the front of the bus. Everly giggled. We should pick out seats for all of them to reduce their tension, Hoyu said brightly. Winston and Alden can sit together. And Jeffy and Marcia. And Tayet, get an instructor. Astrid shouted. They've accidentally let someone evil into the program. Yes, we need to kick Hoyu off the bus, Alden agreed. Line of asterisks. Just after 8 o'clock, the bus put them all out at one of the side entrances for Rosa Grove Mall. Despite a number of increasingly horrible seating arrangements being discussed, the class had opted for nonviolence in the end. Alden had gone to the back to save a seat for Max, who stared silently out the window the whole trip. It wasn't a bad thing since it gave Alden time to get some homework done en route. Mehdi had sat with Khan, while Everly had spent most of the trip trying to cheer up Vandy. Marcia and Winston had ended up sitting together by default. He was pretending to sleep so that he didn't have to talk to anyone. But unlike the rest of their team, Marcia seemed barely bothered by the scolding they'd received. According to Hoyu, who could see her tablet from his own seat, she spent the ride watching Best of Meister fights compilations. Alden was one of the last people to leave the bus, and as he stepped off, he was surprised to find that Maricel had hung back instead of heading toward the mall with Tayet. Curious, he dragged his feet a little. In response, she dragged her own feet a little. Since everybody else was eager to get to the promised meal, they ended up lingering outside after the group had run ahead. This section of the mall's exterior had large advertisements playing on the walls. An avowed famous for mountain rescues stood on a peak in a raging storm while the camera slowly zoomed in to show that her makeup was flawless, despite the water sheeting off her face. Bright red lips smiled, and the words "still kissable" appeared beneath her chin. Then the glitzy commercial faded to be replaced by images of children studying in a language academy. "What's up?" asked Alden, blinking against the wind as he looked down at Maricel. "Do you remember when I asked you about wizards changing our return destinations after a summons? To somewhere other than Anzidora?" "Yep," he said, keeping his voice light even though his stomach clenched at the topic. Maricel took a deep breath. "It was for somebody I met in intake. He still wants to leave. I was trying to find a safe way for him to do it, so he wouldn't choose a dangerous way again. I told him what I read online about escaping after a summons being possible and what you said about it probably being true. I thought he believed me. I thought I had convinced him to wait a while." She sounded unhappy, but Alden couldn't help feeling relieved that she hadn't been asking for herself. "The guy didn't listen?" he guessed. Maricel shook her head. "He sent me a message earlier. He said he had everything he needed ready. He said it was my last chance to go with him." Alden waited for her to continue. "He's going in a boat. It's night. There's rain coming, and the ocean's very rough. Maybe that's why he thinks the patrols won't be able to find him this time." "She's worried. The authorities here do deal with stuff like this all the time," Alden said. "And if you told somebody, I told Instructor Fragment." Maricel lowered her voice. "She and the principal stayed with me while we called someone from Sleyca Guard. They asked me a bunch of questions, but I don't know anything. Only what I told you now." "Are you in trouble?" "I don't think so. But maybe I should be. I could have told someone earlier instead of trying to talk him out of it myself. They want me to keep trying to get in touch with him, so I text him every few minutes. But he stopped answering when he realized I wouldn't go with him. If something happens." A trio of teenagers with non-avowed tags stepped through the nearby doors. They shrieked as the wind almost stole the large pizza box from one girl's hands, then they all started laughing about it. "He'll be fine," said Alden. "There's no way this is the first time someone's tried to use rough weather to slip past the patrols. It probably happens weekly." Fragment said the same thing. "And the man who interviewed me didn't seem worried, but, plus there's always Edding." Alden remembered Lexi telling Khan exactly that about his rough seas boat trip to Matadero the day of the party. If your friend capsizes, or if he gets lost, that's always an option. She made a face. "I know. And thinking about it that way makes me wonder if I was wrong to tell on him. What if he could have made it? And been happy? But because of me, he'll get caught. Most people don't have a translation in front of their eyes. Greater than said the advertisement on the wall. Make sure your children can talk to the world. Greater than. This isn't the first time he's run. They'll put a lot of restrictions on him when they bring him back," Maricel went on. "He'll hate me forever. This is what I wanted to ask you. Once he's back, if he doesn't mind, will you try talking to him for me?" "Why me?" Alden had wondered the last time she'd questioned him about escaping via summons. She seemed to think he had more insight to offer than he did. "I'm not an authority on getting off the island or being summoned or anything. There are much better people to—" "You're one of us," Maricel said, taking a step closer to him. "A Globy. That really matters to him. And you don't hate it here, But you don't think other people are stupid or crazy if they do. You're a nice person. And you know summoners even though you're our age. There aren't any other people like that at all. Maybe he'll listen to you. I guess if that specific combination of qualities is her criteria, there aren't a lot of matches. I mean, I'm willing to try, I guess. No promises on my success at reasoning with anyone. Thank you. Her shoulders slumped and she let out a long breath. You're a better friend than I am. I'm sorry. I'll try not to be so much trouble to you. We're good, said Alden. I've thought you were cool ever since you went off on those assholes who were like you. A rabbit, and declared your intention to run across a planet to get back home. She looked pained. That's really not who I am most of the time. I get that. It was a bad day for you. You were still cool. Now stop worrying. Let the professionals handle the problem. And take me to eat. Line of asterisks. They feasted. The restaurant was on the 3rd floor of the mall. It wasn't a big spot. 41 students, 6 instructors, and 1 principal nearly filled the place up. Tables had been pushed together for them by a line of windows that looked out over one of the mall's outdoor recreation areas. A wide, shallow fountain with embedded lights periodically put on a show for people walking past down there. Alden assumed the jets of water operated in time to music, but he couldn't hear it through the thick glass and the sound of everyone talking over each other. Do you think all the garlic fried rice is yours? Lexi asked Alden. I think everyone else had a shot at it already. He loaded his plate. I have waited patiently. Now they can fight me for it. He spooned achara beside his rice and eyed the fresh batch of lumpia that one of the servers had just set at the other end of the table. They looked like they were coated in caramelized sugar. Those must be dessert. The stars were all meat dishes, including the crispy legend that Hoyu had been so eager to try. But the restaurant had made a delicious jackfruit entree, too, so Alden wasn't suffering except from a bit of envy. Principal Sleyca was paying for everything, and the food kept coming. Dining with teachers had been stiff at first, but it soon became clear that this was more of a social, getting-to-know-you event in the faculty's mind. The longer they went without talking about everyone's performance and schoolwork, the more people loosened up. Several seats away, Finley was telling people about his father. He retired from being an electrician and bought a pub. Loses loads of money on it and drives my mom crazy, but he says it's his dream. Instructor Klein and I were on the same hero team for a couple of years when I first started out, Foxbolt was saying to Astrid. We didn't have a single superhuman incident with anyone over C rank, but Berlin had just been selected to host a wound vault. Protesters were pouring in from everywhere, flooding the streets every day for months. And then when the building actually started, we were on guard duty 24/7. Astrid looked baffled. Were that many people mad about it? I thought magical medical care wasn't controversial anymore. It's not, Foxbolt said. In general, artificial wombs are one of the most contentious areas remaining these days. Which is a bit odd considering they were almost universally praised when the contract was first being hammered out. Instructor Klein heaved a sigh. Most of you are thinking about careers that will lead you off the island, so you have to start paying attention to what's going on in the world. Those of you who were born here will find that a number of things our society considers completely benign are scandalous in other places and vice versa. On that note, you'll all get to take everyone's favorite course twice, right before you graduate from the high school and in uni, Principal Sleyca said, giving the people in her vicinity a wicked smile. About comportment and representation. We have to take the national manners class more than once? Reinhard asked. Alden was sitting far enough away from them that he wasn't really involved in the conversation, but at that, he swallowed a lump of garlic rice and looked across the table at Lexi and Hoyu. What's the national manners class? Hoyu, who had just stuffed another bite of pork belly into his mouth, nudged Lexi demandingly with an elbow. It's what it sounds like, Lexi said. They teach you how the government wishes you'd behave and what they want you to say about certain issues whenever you are working or communicating with people off the island. Khan, who had claimed the seat on the other side of his brother, rolled his eyes. It's the brainwashing class. The High Council made it mandatory for schools to teach it a long time ago, more than a decade, Lexi said. But people are still fighting about it during elections, Khan concluded. Who decides what our national comportment should be? Alden asked. That's what the fights are mostly about. Hoyu took a sip of his water. When they're not about whether or not something like that should exist in the first place. Mehdi had been quiet and moody for most of the meal, so it was a surprise when he chimed in. It's not fair. The really old people lived however they wanted and said whatever they wanted when they got their powers. And now they are suddenly trying to make all of these rules for the rest of us. Vandy overheard him. But we have a country of our own here now. They didn't. Another server dropped a plate in front of Alden, and he finally got his hands on the dessert offering. The crunchy, sugar-coated spring roll wrappers were full of banana. He took one and bit into it, giving himself permission to zone out while Vandy expounded about the unprecedented nature of Nzidora and the importance of careful lawmaking. Marcia was watching Shrike spin a knife. Winston was picking at his food and avoiding everyone's eyes like he'd suffered a terrible humiliation instead of a combat death in the gym. Dare I hope he'll be less of a pain moving forward. Max and Jeffy were sitting beside each other and answering Instructor Marian's questions about where they'd grown up. Max was talking about South Africa like a normal person, in contrast to Jeffy, who was delivering unnecessarily obscure hints about his own home. Instructor Marian looked confused, and Alden couldn't blame him. About the only thing you could pin down from the ramble was that Jeffy had grown up in a house with grandparents and an uncle. He'd just finished describing his former school as a place where there might or might not have been many people with mohawks. All right. Marian's tone said that he'd decided going with it was the correct course of action. As for me, I grew up not far from where we're sitting right now. I wouldn't be surprised if my parents are wandering around the mall at the moment. They eat out every night, and they like the food hall downstairs. Max nodded. Are you second general or third on one side? The instructor said. Second on the other. That prompted a turn in the discussion as people started chiming in with their own avowed lineages. Unlike Marion, most of the faculty present had been born off the island. The students, of course, had almost all been born here. And more of them had large families than Alden had realized. Nobody was describing anything quite like the multi-generational Bullet clan situation, but the number of people mentioning tons of siblings was more than he would have expected from a cross-section of peers back home. Mehdi had 3 older brothers, an older sister, and a little brother. Tayet was one of 7. Jupiter had a set of siblings all named after planets in their solar system. Except they skipped Uranus and went straight to Neptune. When Khan piped up to inform everyone that he and Lexi were expecting another sibling sometime in the next couple of years, his brother reached over to smack him on the back of the head. Oh. What was that for? Don't just tell everyone on the island our parents' reproductive plans. Khan rolled his eyes. There's going to be a whole new person with our last name. What are we supposed to do? Pretend they found a baby growing on a tree. That's not the point. Do you know if they're going to have a girl or a boy? Astrid asked. They let us all be surprises, so I assume it's going to be the same for number 4. Khan held up a fork threateningly when Lexi looked like he wanted to smack him again. Alden filed that information away in his Don't Make Assumptions file. If anyone had asked him, he would have guessed Lexi and Khan were designed. They were both aesthetically gifted even though they didn't have points and appeal yet. Plus, if you ignored personality, style, and the fact that Lexi was crazy fit from keeping up his ballet physique, they would have looked very similar even by brotherly standards. What about you, Alden? Alden looked at Astrid questioningly. I know you don't have brothers and sisters, but do you have a lot of cousins? No. It was just me and my aunt. He thought it would be the end of his turn, but everyone was still waiting patiently, like they were giving him time to say more. Really, you guys. That's it for me on the family front. There might be some distant cousins thrice removed out there somewhere, but other than that. I have 2 close friends back home, he added. One of them is practically my brother. He steered clear of saying his parental situation was shitty. We basically raised each other. Is it the friend who's keeping your cat? asked Hoyu. What's his name? Is he going to come visit? Alden suddenly realized he'd dived headfirst into something more dramatic than he'd intended. Okay. So, even the shriveled portions of the Bo situation sound kind of. His name's Bo. I'm sure he'll come visit eventually. He is on my guest list. Alden tried to sound casual. I haven't mentioned him before because he's not home right now. He ran away after my funeral. Hoyu blinked. Lexi frowned. Khan squinted at him. I managed to get in touch with him a few weeks ago, Alden explained. He's fine. He said he would go back home as soon as he'd figured things out. This story had been supported by some of the fake phone calls Bo had insisted Alden make in public locations. Nobody responded. And there's my friend Jeremy. His parents are lawyers. He has a sister in marching band. He's taking great care of my cat. Thank you for being the sane one, Jeremy. Alden searched his mind for other proof that he'd had a mundane and solid social life before coming to Nzidora. I regularly buy gifts for an alien chained to a desk in the Chicago consulate. That's not exactly. Ah, screw it. I'll tell them about how Kibby is cooler than all the other younger siblings that have been mentioned tonight. You had a funeral? Khan blurted. Lexi looked over at him. You know everyone thought he was dead. What else would have happened? I don't know. It just never occurred to me that he'd had an actual funeral. Was it a good funeral? Astrid sounded fascinated. I mean, I wasn't around for it, said Alden, startled. But no. There were like 1,000 people there, and I only knew a few of them well. That is so weird, said Khan. It must feel really weird. Does it? Was there a casket? Astrid asked. Or an urn? It's only weird if I think about it. I haven't had much time to bother. And according to my aunt, there was no casket, Astrid. Just a giant picture of me on a stand. You deserved something more exciting than that, said Hoyu. I agree, said Astrid. I could come up with a better funeral in 5 minutes. The dinner ended with a lot of people planning increasingly absurd funerals for themselves. Alden eventually found himself nodding along while Astrid described her wish to have her ashes launched off the top of Nautilus Needle at midnight by a magic cannon. Hoyu wanted a statue made of himself and placed somewhere statues didn't belong in order to perplex as many people as possible. And Lexi refused to play along, which resulted in Khan planning a jazz funeral for him without his input. When they left the table, their stomachs were full of food, and they were all laughing too loudly about their own dumb ideas. Alden decided that was a nice combination, all things considered. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. A few hours earlier. Line of asterisks. Line of asterisks. Jacob hadn't meant to call Maricel Alcantara. It wasn't part of the plan. But as the cruiser had set off, dipping down into a wave and making his stomach churn, he'd suddenly thought, what if she regrets it? This place that pretended to be a palace 1 minute only to show its true colors as a prison the next. She thought she'd be alright here, with these people, but how could she be? Everything got worse when you left intake, not better as people kept promising him. So he had sent her a message. He had tried to give her one last chance. She'd refused, and he'd forced himself not to answer any of her subsequent messages. They would probably never see each other again. Salt water spattered the windows as the man in the cockpit flipped switches and turned the silver wheel. Jacob sat with the others in the cabin. The boat was well appointed, but he could hardly make out the wood floors or the galley. Supplies covered every surface. The dinette furniture had been removed to make room for something particularly large wrapped in a tarp. There was food, of course, but mostly the boat was filled with magical equipment, spell ingredients, cases that Jacob was sure held weapons, all things that were difficult or expensive for people to obtain off Nzidora. The bunks had been left intact, but they'd have to sleep in shifts if they wanted to use the beds. 3 of the passengers were crammed onto the small settee right now, and a 4th was sitting on top of a large plastic bin he proudly told Jacob was full of stolen potions. The 5th was. There was no 5th. I robbed a dispensary earlier today. That wasn't easy. But it will be a welcome gift for our brothers in the fight, greater than the man sitting on the bin had said. Jacob was the youngest here. The man who'd stolen the potions was around 25. The strange one on the end of the settee who kept humming to himself and picking at a scab on the back of his hand until it bled looked a decade older. The girl with her soft, dark curls piled up on top of her head in a barrette had said she was 19 and ready to see what's out there when they all introduced themselves. The other one. There was no other passenger. The captain had graying hair. I wonder if I'm a part of the fight now. He hadn't planned to be, but ever since he had first reached out to superhumans at large, he had felt like the stars kept aligning. Everything they asked for came to him so much easier than he had thought it would. His eyes found his own contribution to the boat's wealth of strange devices. The submerger had a place of honor on the floor just beside the captain. The aquarium-like container sat on top of a crystal dial that was obviously made to hold it. Jacob hadn't had to get that part. The captain had been in possession of it already, and he knew how to use it from a previous experience with one of these devices. The submerger would only be the second one Sal had obtained. They were calling him a hero. I don't think they would be as impressed with me if they'd met Orpheus Vora themselves. He'd have sold Earth to the devil for a cigarette. You need to relax. The girl bumped his knee with her own. We've got a long trip ahead of us even with our friends meeting us halfway. If you stay this tense the whole time, it'll be rough. Aren't you nervous, too? Jacob asked. Not much. No reason for any of us to be nervous, greater than the captain said. As soon as we've gained some more distance from the island, we'll use this beautiful thing. Greater than. He pointed down at the submerger. We'll sink down deep, deep. And we'll go so slowly we become one with the depths. So slowly we leave no mark for them to trace and make no sound for them to hear. We will slip past the patrols and pass through the sea without an echo. Greater than. Jacob swallowed. The captain smiled out at the darkening sky. We will fade from Menzidora like shadows. And no one will see us again until we are reborn into the light. Greater than Chapter 130. After their dinner, the class broke up. Some people left to head back to the dorms, meet up with friends, or get an early start on weekend family time. Principal Sleyca and most of the instructors took their leave, while Torsten Klein was stuck with the job of seeing the bus safely back to campus. The vehicle drove itself, but the school required it to have a babysitter. The mall closes at midnight. He called after the students as they scattered. If you're not on the bus 5 minutes later, you can find your own way. Hoyu wanted to throw coins into a particular fountain because he did it every time he came to the mall, so Lexi and Alden tagged along. 3 people heading in the same direction with a goal, even such a small one, must have had some natural attraction to it because several other guys with no plans of their own ended up following them. Jeffy and Finley weren't that surprising. Like Alden, they didn't know their way around the giant shopping complex all that well. Reinhard came, too. And Maddie seemed to have ended up with them accidentally. He tried to go with Con, only to have Everly Kim give him such a frosty look that he'd run to join the nearest available group. Why the fountain? He groaned. It's for little kids. Because throwing coins in the fountain is good luck, Hoyu said. If you leave Rosa Grove without throwing coins in, it's bad luck. You guys can do the slide if you'd rather. It's right next to it. Maddie brightened. I haven't been on the slide in forever. There's always a line when I go shopping with my mother and she never wants to wait. Reinhard gave him a superior look. So you love the sliding board, but the fountain's for little kids. They bickered just like the little kids they were both so insistent they weren't until the group reached an atrium. You could see all 4 floors of the mall from here, and the panels that made up the roof could be opened to make it open air. They were closed now. The rain that had been promised by the thunder earlier had begun, and water streamed down the glass. Alden patted his messenger bag. He had 2 disposable ponchos in there. He felt the smug satisfaction of the properly prepared. Never mind the fact that I could probably buy all kinds of rain-repelling gear here in the mall. With the roof closed, The atrium echoed with the voices of nighttime shoppers and the happy shrieks of a few children who were going down the slide with their parents. Wide enough for 5 people to ride it side by side on slippery mats, it ran from the 4th floor to the ground. As passengers zipped down it, colorful trails of light appeared in their wake, then faded out to match the deep gray surface again. "There's no line," Jeffy said excitedly. "Let's go." Everyone but Alden and his roommates shot off toward a staircase that led up to the 4th floor. "I hope they're not disappointed," said Hoyu, taking the same stairs down to the bottom level a few seconds later. "I used to love the slide." "Used to?" Alden asked. It looked fun to him. Definitely not just for little kids, despite all the arguing about it. Hoyu looked over at it. "I've been kind of worried since we started school that things like that were going to turn boring. I don't know. I just don't want to ride it and find out I don't get the swoopy guts thing anymore. It'll be sad if it's not special now." "Because of the gym." Lexi was nodding. Alden suddenly realized what they were talking about, and he didn't like it at all. "No. Is the insane stuff we do in the Majiffi's gym going to ruin carnival rides?" "The rooftop-to-rooftop coaster was still great," said Hoyu. "But just think of everything we did today. And if you compare that to the slide. I'm quitting school. Switch to arts or sciences at least so we don't have to find a new roommate," Hoyu told him. The fountain Hoyu liked was actually a huge, beautifully detailed scale model of Anzidora. It stood on the pavement at ground level. The interior of the knee-deep basin was a dark gray blue, and the water inside it formed tiny waves that matched the ocean. At the center stood F-City and Apex, the circle and the crescent connected by the span. There were no vehicles or tiny people, but lights glimmered in the windows of the buildings and skyscrapers, occasionally flicking on and off. A single purple beam shooting upwards served as a "You're here" indicator over the model of the mall. A couple of kiosks placed on opposite sides of the fountain sold coins. "You pick the project you want your donation to fund," Lexi explained while Hoyu poked at the screen. "And you get the coin design for it. Or coins." 8 shining tokens about the size of silver dollars clattered into the kiosk's tray. Alden wondered if Hoyu had gotten so many to share, but that wasn't the case. He took all of them for himself and walked about a quarter of the way around the fountain with the air of someone who had an established favorite coin-tossing spot. Lexi bought a single coin for himself, then Alden stepped up to read about the projects the fountain was funding right now. The one that was farthest from its goal was creating a permanently balmy custom climate for the second largest park on the island. "Do we build that kind of thing for ourselves or do we pay wizards to do it for us?" He donated to a plan that would beautify one of the streets near campus because he figured he'd get to enjoy it more often, and coins with images of buildings on one side and trees on the other fell into the tray. 8 for 8R gold was a lot more expensive than tossing pennies, but he had more than enough wishes to justify it. He flipped a coin through the air, trying to see if he could land it precisely on top of the spot Lexi had just hit with his own toss. "I wish for Kibby to be happy." The coin hit the miniature sea with a satisfying plop. It didn't land in exactly the spot he'd been aiming for. It might have if his word chain hadn't run out. He threw the next one. Bo stays safe and gets to live however he wants. The silver disc sank beneath the surface. His third coin was for himself. "I wish for more moments like this one." His stomach was full of good food. His body was tired in a nice way from the course. People were laughing as they went down the slide. Calypso music poured out of one of the shops. And at the kiosk he'd just used, a small girl was patiently reading aloud the project descriptions to an even younger boy who was holding an sticker in both hands and staring up at the screen. Nothing too fancy. Just more moments like this one. As many of them as I can have. The coin hit the water. The ripples didn't spread very far before they disappeared into the waves. On Apex, a man wearing lounge pants tucked into the tops of a pair of galoshes stepped out of a brick townhouse. He chuckled as a golden retriever, tail wagging, shoved its way past him and bolted down the steps so fast it almost tripped over its own paws. "Even in the rain?" a woman's voice called out from the house. "He's a good boy," he said. And I promised. He closed the door. The dog waited on the sidewalk, standing on his hind feet and whining excitedly. His owner took the steps down, galoshes splashing in a puddle that had gathered in a dip in the concrete. A large drone over the man's head kept him dry. It had no propellers, but it hovered quietly and easily above him as if the wind had little effect on the dark fabric sails it used to shield him. The dog was chubby, and his fur was going silver around his muzzle. But he raced across the one-lane street with the energy of a puppy and bounded into the grassy square that the townhouse faced. Other, similar houses surrounded it. They were mostly quiet right now, curtains pulled tight against the night. The man lifted his left hand as he reached the square and snapped his fingers twice. Street lamps and pathway lights turned on in an instant, illuminating the wet grass and the dog running in eager circles. "All right. Fetch it is." He pulled a tennis ball from his jacket pocket and threw it. The dog raced after it, barking joyfully, heedless of the rain. They played for several minutes before a chirping sound called the man's attention to his watch. "What is it?" he asked. "Elias, why won't you answer your damn interface when the SliceOfLife guard is calling you?" "Hello, Archibald. Why do government officials keep calling me on my interface when they know it's not my preferred contact method for the information business? You stubborn old, you're almost as old as I am. And I keep SliceOfLife fully supplied with top-of-the-line info gear. Nobody wants to wear your spy equipment, Elias." "Many people do." While Elias tossed the soggy tennis ball again, the other man sighed. "We're having some trouble with the runaways we queried you on earlier this evening. It's been long enough that they might have slipped past the bulk of our patrols. We'd like to find them before they hit the edge of our territory and run into less tolerant parties." As he finished speaking, notes appeared in front of Elias's eyes, and a soothing, male voice whispered in his ear. Elias listened to its report for a few seconds, then said, "I see you requested intelligence on a 17-year-old boy, a couple who thought an escape attempt would spice up their love life, and that funny woman who enjoys the thrill of being plucked from the waves every couple of months." He also saw that the couple and the thrill seeker had already been brought back. "The audio recording and video you purchased indicated the boy left in the company of 5 others. And it seems you haven't found any sign of them, judging by the fact that most of the members of your day shift haven't returned to their homes." Archibald grumbled something, then said more clearly, "Where are they?" "I doubt my creation knows the precise answer to that. I can have it make guesses based on the captain's personality profile and the capabilities of their vessel, but I don't have recording devices out at sea. We want anything you've got that will help. We'll pay the fee." Archibald Carrison said the word fee like it was a curse. "How uncharacteristically generous you're being with the budget tonight. It's because of the 2 high ranks traveling with them, I suppose." Elias whistled, and his dog trotted toward him, head high and tail wagging. "You ought to be required by law to help with matters like this if you ask me. Every time an avowed makes it off the island and causes trouble for ordinary people, it's a setback for global relations and puts our efforts to function as an independent nation without interference in geop. If I was required by law to do any such thing, I would get on a boat myself. And you would not find me." He bent to lay a hand on top of the dog's soft, wet head. "Or I would run for election." He could practically hear the other man shuddering at the thought. "You'll just have to be content with the fact that I don't hold myself to the same privacy standards as our system. If I did, I'd tell you nothing at all. Now, how much help do you want?" Archibald didn't hesitate. "No need to help your creation along with your power," he said at once. "Just its own work will be sufficient." The informant sighed. "You heard him. What do we know about the missing boat? Synthesize all relevant information and make predictions." Data began to pour in at once. "You're looking the wrong place," he said mildly. "You need to look deeper." "Did they sink?" Archibald asked in surprise. "They almost definitely did, but not in the way you mean. I hope you have a lot of manpower for tonight's search. And that they are strong swimmers." It was silent at the bottom of the sea. And black. Jacob had been doing his best to ignore the nothingness beyond the windows of the submerged cruiser by browsing the internet and texting his mom. He had told her he was out for the night with some new friends he'd made, so their chat back and forth was light. She didn't need more worries. He was on the settee, curled up in the corner to stay out of his companion's way. He could hear them all breathing. With the engines off, the boat was that silent. No crashing waves or rushing wind. The lights came from a few battery-powered lanterns in the submerger, which was shining in the cockpit, the crystal dial that had become its new base occasionally flickering and calling the captain's attention toward it. Though he never touches it, Jacob noted. He'd halted the engines, then set their course using the dial on a glass stick that might have been called either a stylus or a wand in Jacob's opinion. There were logograms on the dial that controlled depth, direction, speed, and Jacob didn't know what else. After the captain had played around with the thing, pressing the stylus to one logogram and then another, timing himself with a stopwatch for some reason every time he made an adjustment, he'd flipped the whole submerger over, so that the oily yellow liquid inside the tank was on the bottom instead of the top. When he'd placed the submerger back on top of the dial, the silver bead in the middle of the liquid had sunk almost to the bottom. And then so had the boat. Magic encasing it, water crawling up the sides to pull it under. Jacob shuddered. No touching this or casting spells at her, the captain had warned in an ominous voice, shooing the man with the scabby hand away from the device when it was over. She's a powerful but sensitive piece of equipment, and she is all that protects us from our enemies in the deep. Jacob had no desire at all to touch the submerger. He just wanted the magical, creepy part of their journey to be over. If possible, he would have moved their company's thief away from the crate full of stolen medicine and looked around for one of those knockout drugs they'd given him the last time they'd hauled him back to intake. Being unconscious until they were back above the water sounded like a great idea. Other people weren't as anxious as he was. "Well," said the girl, Riley. She clapped her hands together and bounced onto her feet. "It turns out that traveling away from home gets boring after only a few hours. I'm going to go see what it's like outside if that's all right with you, Captain." He was lying on one of the bunks now, reading a paperback. "It's fine to go out. You can even touch the envelope if you want to get a first-hand look at the power of Jacob's gift to us." Riley snatched up one of the lanterns and squeezed her way through all the supplies toward the door. "You coming?" she asked, beckoning toward Jacob. He shook his head. He didn't see the appeal in getting even closer to the darkness. She left, and he tried to relax. It wasn't made any easier by the company. The thief kept laughing loudly at whatever he was watching or reading on his interface, and the other man was poking around the boat with an intensity that was only matched by his randomness. He stared at a nick in one of the cabinets, then at one of the weapon cases, then he peered at the tarp that covered the large object that sat where the dinette had once been. The edge of the tight canvas started to pull up at the bottom. Said Jacob, alarmed. "Should you be doing that?" "Get away from that, Will," said the captain, looking over the top of his book. "It's delicate. Dangerous." The man leaped back, muttered an apology, then went to stare at the label on a jar of peanut butter. The captain had only introduced the strange man as a friend who needed a lift earlier. Seeing Jacob's expression, he seemed to decide further explanation was needed. "Don't worry about Will," he said. "He only fidgets around like this because he's nervous. Isn't that right, pal?" "I'm not nervous," Will muttered, rocking back and forth. "It's just very small in here." "Claustrophobic?" the thief asked in an unconcerned voice. "What's a boy your age doing cooped up in here with us?" the captain asked Jacob. "Go out and take a look. Not many times in your life you'll get to see such a thing." Will opened a cabinet and yelped as dozens of large stickers slid out and fluttered around him. He scrambled backward, his socks slipping on some of the stickers as he fled. Stickers seemed like a wasteful addition on a boat stuffed so full of necessities. Jacob stood up to get a better look at them. Most of them were square or rectangular. A few were die-cut, horned monster faces. They said things like "Sell for true peace" and "Who's gonna save you from the demons?" Some were in English, others in Chinese. He even spotted one in French. The captain shook his head. I told Riley she could bring 1 box of those since she spent so long designing them. Should have specified the size of the box. She's got them tucked in every nook and cranny. Will had picked up a sticker that looked like a holographic cube. He was staring at it now. Guess it's just as interesting as the peanut butter label. Jacob tried to help clean up the stickers, but Will swatted him away. Fine then. He didn't want to go outside and take a look, but staying in here wasn't much better after all. Excuse me, he said when he was halfway to the door. Wait, who was I apologizing? He needed to relax and focus on getting outside. By the fountain, there was a home furnishings store that specialized in extraterrestrial imports. Now this is not the kind of shopping experience you get in Chicago, Alden thought, sitting on a very short stool in one corner of the store, waiting for his body heat to make the stone-like material it was made of release a scent. The sign beside the stool had said it would happen, and nobody else had wanted to try it. Where is their sense of adventure? How often do you get to experience a sit-and-sniff stool from myth? There was plenty of other adventure to be had in this place, though. Finley was trying to figure out how to read a device that said it was a clock even though it just looked like a jar full of differently colored gels. Mehdi was sinking deeper and deeper into a squishy blob-shaped massager. Soon nothing would be left of him but his nose. And Hoyu and Lexi were browsing the shelves. Jeffy and Reinhard had hung back to do the slide one more time, but it had been so long, Alden suspected they'd either gotten lost or forgotten they were supposed to be rejoining them. A sickly sweet smell that vaguely reminded him of apples filled the air, and with his curiosity satisfied, he stood up to look for a new weird experience. He found Hoyu tapping on a 2-foot-tall cylindrical lamp that was lit by a swarm of tiny luminescent bugs. Lexi was right beside him, examining all the supplies you would need to keep your bug lamp alive. "You're finally off the stool," Hoyu said. "We were just talking about you. Were you saying nice things? We were wondering if you still wanted to come with us to Matadero. It's a long trip out and it's not much to see since we can't get too close, but the boat's fun." "Tomorrow." Hoyu nodded. "Or Sunday if the weather's better for it then. We're going to ask Vandy too. Her mom's in residence there, and she's so down about the way things went in class this week." Lexi wasn't complaining about being a water taxi. Alden looked over at him. "I'm selling the boat soon," he said. "My parents were just trying to distract me with a new hobby and give me an escape so that I wouldn't go crazy waiting for selection, but I don't have time for it now. Having the money is more practical. This is our last chance to farewell a noble vessel." Hoyu saluted the lamp for some reason. "They don't plan to get close. There's no reason to be weirded out by the idea of viewing Matadero from a distance." "I'll go," he said. "Thanks for inviting me." He spent a few more minutes browsing with them, pausing to admire a case full of the same colorful rock creatures he'd enjoyed watching with the other rabbits in intake. They were all in their hibernation mode right now. The store had the date of their next wake-up posted on a sign. "We placed bets on these dudes in intake," he told the others, pointing. "The guys in the apartment next door to mine had a whole table full of them." "Seriously? They're kind of expensive." Hoyu leaned toward the case, and his breath fogged the glass beside a mottled pinkish creature. "All the apartments have unique fun features. For socializing. Some people just went from room to room, trying out everyone else's games and furniture." "What did you have?" Lexi asked. "A very dramatic coffee pot and a pinball machine." "Sounds like fun," said Hoyu. It was. They make it as comfortable as they can. It's supposed to be a soft landing. Not soft enough for everyone, I guess. He wondered if Maricel's friend had been caught yet. CNH has been even better, believe it or not. The rooms weren't as luxurious, but the business and the good company were making him feel more settled in than Intake had managed to. "Well, we have a polar bear," said Hoyu. "It's hard to compete with that." "True. Sunny is the main reason I stay with you all. Plus the spontaneous outbreaks of mooing." "Warning, you are approaching a blockaded area. Turn back or request teleportation to Nzidora now." "Told you." Riley's soft curls were freed from their barrette, and they drifted in the magic the captain called the envelope. She had unfolded the boat's stern boarding platform so that she could get even closer to the ocean that surrounded them. She leaned back, arms spread wide. Behind her there was nothing but blackness. Any faint light from the night sky so far above them couldn't penetrate this deep. The angle of the girl's body made her look like she was about to fall into an endless void, but the submerger's magic held her in place. Jacob had touched the magic himself just once, right after he came out here to join her an hour or so ago. The protective envelope was invisible, but it felt like the air itself grew denser and denser the farther he extended his arm from the edges of the boat, until he couldn't push through anymore. Captain couldn't resist kissing the edge of the forbidden zone. One last, she lifted a middle finger covered in magenta polish to the sky. To all those avowed who go along with playing captors to our own kind. Jacob was still staring at the blockade notice. What if the system sends us back? Riley snorted. It doesn't do that unless you ask it to. Trust me. I've lived here my whole life. People who make it through to Matadero on Dares say it just keeps flashing the warning. When you get close enough, your boat smashes into shielding. That's the real restricted area. And we're not headed that way anyway. We're just sneaking along the perimeter, right below all those patrols. She smiled up at the silent blackness over their heads. Hear that, assholes? There are superhumans soon to be at large under your noses and you don't have a clue. Her voice disappeared into the envelope. She crossed her arms over her chest. After a little while, she said, You know, you're quiet for the hero. I'm not a hero. You sort of are, Riley said. The captain thinks so anyway. Apparently this thing you've brought us is rare on Earth. Sal only has one more, and the person who brought it back from the Triplanets years ago won't let it be used for anything but helping runners hide or relocate. They are not really caught up with the times. Those of us who don't like the way things are done need to start pushing people to think, don't we? Since meeting her for the first time this afternoon, Jacob had come to understand that Riley's reasons for leaving Anzidora weren't at all the same as his. She liked the island. She was just bored. She'd really wanted to be powerful, but she was a C-rank stamina brute who couldn't pick a uni major because they all sounded pointless. On track for a do-nothing life like my do-nothing friends and family, she'd said. I'd rather be an activist. She had been spending a lot of time system chatting with anonymous and registered avowed who were members of SAL, and she wanted to join the fight for avowed rights. We're Earth's protectors, you know, she told him a few minutes after they'd received the message. She was still pressing herself back into the envelope as far as she could. Even if chaos stays away, you and I are protecting Earth right now. With our lives. We're not really. Just think of how many people are benefiting from the contract at this very moment. Billions of them. In all kinds of ways. And what did they have to give up for it? She pointed at him. Nothing. If there's some kind of universal apocalypse, I guess they might have to make room for some alien refugees, but right now, they pay nothing. All they have to do is let the system make us. We're what the Artonans care about here. I'm not a supremacist or anything, but every avowed should be treated like we're saving human lives just by breathing. Because we are. She's so Anisidoran, Jacob thought. She was no Hazel Volra by any means, bossing him around like he was a servant, blackmailing him into being her date, and then introducing him to everyone in her family as Jacob the C-rank like she was hoping someone would make comments about his unworthiness. But there was a similar arrogance. A pride he couldn't connect with. And a kind of blind lack of interest in the lives or feelings of people who hadn't been born with a magical purpose. Riley rattled on, explaining that avowed should be allowed to walk across every border on Earth if they wanted and be welcomed with open arms. According to her, that was clearly how the Artonans had imagined it going based on how their own culture worked. What if they hurt people? Riley paused in the middle of a sentence. They? Jacob was jarred for a moment. This wasn't the first time he'd run into this feeling of disconnection, but no matter how many times it happened, it always made him feel lost. We. I meant we. Riley's nose wrinkled. You're a Globie? You weren't one of those lunatics who thought avowed were disgusting or something before you were selected, Were you? No, Jacob said in an annoyed voice. Then why would you default to thinking what if they hurt people? It's stupid. You've been living on an island entirely full of superhumans. Were we all murdering each other in the streets? Avowed to use your powers on people when you think you can get away with it. This girl I know used her skill to mess with a guy's word chain. And there are other examples. You did it again, she said. Do you seriously not think of yourself as an avowed, too? I know I'm an avowed, he said. I don't have a problem with them. Us. Don't accuse me of stuff when you don't even know me. People like my dad think superhumans are. I don't think that way. I was just asking a question about the point you were making. Riley went quiet and Jacob tried not to let that make him uncomfortable. She hadn't had many quiet spells at all since the boat set out. I didn't mean to let her wind me up. She just won't shut up about all these things that I'm too tired to think about, and she acts like I should care about them but I don't. I don't want to. That's not who I. Finally, she said, you know you'll still be one of us, right? No matter where on Earth you end up. You can run away from the island, but you have to take yourself with you. He turned away. But the only place to go was back in the cabin with the others. Hey. Don't be upset. I've just never met anyone like you before, said Riley. A hand landed on Jacob's shoulder, and he whirled to see her smiling at him. Did your dad think magic was unnatural? Or that avowed were an autoimmune infection that needed to be quarantined? He took a step back from her. Or was it one of the even crazier ideas? She shook her head. Doesn't matter. It's good you're coming with us, Jacob. You need to be around people who'll show you how it really is. How what really is? He asked. She leaned toward him. We're awesome, she said softly. Stronger, healthier, kinder and prettier if we want to be. Smarter. It's harder to see on Anzidora, where everyone's one of us. Why do you think they make us stay there? She sounded so sure of herself it was impossible not to listen. Oh, what if you hurt us ordinary people with your terrible alien magic? You're like working weapons, she scoffed. That's not why they want us all tucked away. Most people would welcome us with open arms, but the ones currently in power. She looked up into the darkness. They say that if the first generation of avowed had been chosen at 40, instead of in their teens, they would have become presidents and prime ministers. They would have ended monopolies and carved out kingdoms for themselves. Jacob had never heard anyone say that before. Some of them almost did things like that anyway. But there were kids who'd grown up in a world without magic, and the people in power saw what was coming before they did. And they decided to bottle the genie back up before it realized what it really was. She bent suddenly and picked up the electric lantern. She held it up high like a torch. We're not going to stay in the bottle for much longer. I'm going to be one of the first ones to break free. Everyone thinks something different about avowed, Jacob thought. I miss not being confused. He started to say, only to be interrupted by a second girl's nervous voice. You guys? She was standing right there on the stern of the boat with them. She was so thin that the pink and white polka-dotted sweatshirt she was wearing looked like it had swallowed her. Her pale eyes were wide. Something is really wrong. Tobe continued,